When I started driving truck, I think I remember something being told to me all the time by the guy that trained me. And that was, hey, watch your tandems.
You're listening to Cents Per Mile with your host, Charles Gracie, and his co-host, Paul Gibson. Joined by Josh Haynes, they'll be tackling tough industry topics, asking even tougher questions, all to find better solutions as they try to make sense make sense.
Happy New Year. Thank you for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson.
Hey, I'm Josh Haynes. Do you know why they put those tiny pockets on jeans? It's to hold driver pay. That's my joke for today. Gentlemen, we are talking about driver pay, but I'm just going to send it over to Charles. I just wanted to head and cut you guys off with the topic.
We're starting off the new year with you taking my whole shtick here.
I'll let you go and say, what are we talking about today, Charles?
Driver pay or the lack of.
Oh.
But the little pocket shtick was real good.
We're talking about driver pay in general, which is not good. So it's going to get pretty spicy. It's going to get pretty heated. But as always, with all of our hot takes and all of, pointing out what sucks, we will definitely have some insights on how we can possibly fix this.
Yeah, I mean, and it's going to start by jumping into our next session, Paul, when we hop in here and talk about behind the wheel. So we got an interesting one. Let's take it away.
All right, it's time for Behind the Wheel. So partnering with CDLLife, we get access to their audience. They let us pull them, and we actually get real drivers, real opinions about real issues. And this week, with the subject of driver pay, we asked, how do you prefer to get paid? So 26% of drivers who were polled said they'd prefer to get paid per mile, cents per mile. And 30% said they would prefer to get paid percentage. 36% at the lead said they would prefer to get paid hourly. And only 8%, for obvious reasons, said they would prefer to get paid salary. I think that checks out.
Yeah, it does. And from a recruiting perspective, I've been able to communicate all of these different offers, and I'll tell you, they're not always received the way people think they are. Like, I've had hourly driving jobs where they've made that stride to go in that direction, and drivers are very distrustful about it. Salary ones are even more skeptical because they're worried that they're going to be overworked and underpaid based on that salary. So, I mean, there's a lot that feeds into this. I'm excited to dive into this today.
Yeah. I thought it was, I did think that it was super interesting how split it was, which I definitely think will come into our conversation later of how this all should be divided up. But it's very telling with the environment that we're in, the different types of pay, how evenly they're split. Because I think, at the same time, cents per mile is the devil, hourly makes a lot of sense. Percentage has always been there in the background, and most of the time, if you're an owner operator, that's definitely what you're going to want. So it's interesting to see how evenly split that did turn out to be.
I think it's just indicative of the industry as a whole. You got people from all walks of life and what they've gotten comfortable with, and like you said, the devil, a lot of people are going to work with what they know. They know where those landmines are, and they're not sure where they're going to become if we switch stuff for them. So I think as we dive into this, I'm excited to see how people want to communicate this in order to kind of move the needle finally.
Yep. All right. Well, it's time for our next segment, This Week in Recruiting. All right. So it's time for This Week in Recruiting, where we ask Charles, how's this week in recruiting?
Well, we're in 2024. Everyone's big class is there, or is it? Listen, a lot of the recruiting trends and fads, everyone hopes for that big class, but that big class generally doesn't come the first week of the new year. It's usually going to be after that. So because the new year fell on this week, a lot of drivers are recuperating from holidays and with the families. And then once the in-laws get kicked out of the house, then it's time to get back to the business and start talking to those recruiters. So what we're seeing is a lot of people stacked up for next week, a lot of excitement behind that new year, new me mentality. And recruiters should be capitalizing on this. Use this time to cultivate those relationships, to put all the cards on the table and bring in qualified candidates that are sold on what you have, not what they wish you had.
Yeah, I get that. And in my experience too, it was always, that was the interesting thing, is it was always that first week that just looked huge on the schedule. And then when the week came, whatever that number was would cut in half. But still, a lot of those drivers, unlike, most other points in the year, most of the drivers who fell off would keep in contact with you to come back the next week.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's pretty interesting how it does disperse like that. It's the most scary, frustrating thing in the world.
Well, you know what else is happening on the back end is all those relationships that were cultivated last year, where people were delaying because of the holidays. No one wants to take that new job going into a holiday. They don't want to be on the bottom of the seniority list. And with the kind of year we've had, there's been a lot of layoffs. So people are just trying to get a feel for, am I picking a winning team? Those are starting to come back around. They start making contact this week and having those conversations as far as, hey, what's the next week or next couple of weeks look like as far as coming in? So you're starting to see those relationships finally come to fruition. And if a recruiter's doing their job right, they've put notes and they've logged the different things those drivers have been interested in. And you can use this new year, new me mentality as a carrier to promote yourself and try to bring those drivers in.
One thing that I always found interesting at this point in time, kind of on pace with the topic of driver pay, but not necessarily, is how many drivers, especially ones who are 1099, a lot of people don't think about it, but a lot of them wait till this point in time to make this decision for tax purposes, because they don't want to fill out for multiple, they don't want to add a company at the end of December and then all of a sudden have to add that to their taxes. So I've always found that aspect of that kind of interesting too, that you start seeing a lot of those people who are a lot more financially and business minded also beginning to make decisions at this time because of that.
Well, and they're advocating for themselves. Another thing that you're seeing people do is they're waiting because new year, new pay packages, new benefits. They want to wait to make that jump until now, because they didn't know if it was going to look the same if they joined in before the holidays. And we see a lot of that transpire in the trucking industry, where these things are being renewed in end of Q4. So the drivers have become very self-aware that this stuff is taking place, and they're waiting and basing their decisions off what it's going to be, not what it was, because they know that switch is happening.
Well, and especially after the last year that we had back in 2023, which wasn't that far ago. But
hey, man, it's in the past. Leave it there.
That's fair. But I mean, I think that take is actually extremely even more interesting with the market that we're in and hopefully coming out of, but we'll see. That if you are waiting for those changes, you'd almost be more worried that those changes were for the worse versus the better. So it's not that you're necessarily trying to jump on something new. There's also a hesitancy that you've been waiting to make sure you don't jump on the ship, and then the ship just kind of sinks a little bit as soon as you get on it.
Yeah, the ship sinks, or you hop in a new yard and find out you hopped into the dumpster fire that you didn't think you were going into. There's companies that were closing last year. There's so many things that happened. There was driver pay cuts. And I'm not sure we're completely out of the woods on a lot of these things yet, because nothing bounces back quickly. We can just be hopeful that people made wise decisions as far as what 2024 is going to look like for them, to avoid going back and trying to turn down the dial. You can always raise your driver's pay, but going back to lower, it's a different story.
Yeah, that's never a fun topic. Like, hey, man, I know I told you this much a mile, but we're gonna go ahead and rewind that a little bit.
You mean that 90 cents a mile pay package wasn't sustainable? Come on.
No, but this new 72-cent one is.
Hot Seat Services has Rent-A-Recruiter.
Wait!
Hey, Michael, have you heard that Hot Seat Services Rent-A-Recruiter service will place their staff in your organization similar to a temporary hire model?
No way. What else does it do?
Follow me. I have to tell everyone. They take leads in existing databases to put new hires into your business's trucks.
Well, shiver me timbers! What else?
Come on! Their model is more cost efficient because their recruiters are trained and can get your pipeline flowing easier and faster.
No way. Anything else?
No matter how many hires they make, it's a set cost per week, so the more they get, the better their client's cost per hire gets.
Holy sh**.
For more information and to find out for yourself, go to hotseatservices.com.
All right, it's time to make sense. It's our main segment, and today, to start the new year, we decided to tackle driver pay. This is about to be a time. So Charles, I'll just let you run with it first.
Hey man, I appreciate it. I'm taking the gloves off on this one. Listen, we're trying to crack down on a tough topic, driver pay. What's it look like? What's sustainable? What makes sense? I think the first thing, before we can dive down any one of the avenues of which is the right way to pay a driver, I think we all have to acknowledge that they should be paid for all their time, just like anyone else. Now, how you want to carve that pie is up to you and your organization, and may the best company win. But it's all going to start, I believe, coming to a boiling point in 2024 and forward. We need to pay them for all their time. And whether you make that choice on your own as a company, or you wait for the government to make it for you, it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, like from I get it from a carrier cost standpoint, and it's the way it's trucking, so it's always about, oh, this is the way that it's always been. And I mean, you could argue that a lot of that has been that way since, what was it, 1938?
Overregulation.
Right. And so with that, like it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Like, I understand getting paid per mile, and I understand, that that's the way it's been for a long time. And I understand that some people want that. So I'm not trashing it by any means. It is what it is. I think it makes it pretty weird with e-logs. I don't know if anybody remembers that stunt that I pulled a couple years ago, where I locked myself in a closet and followed e-logs as an office employee, and looked at what it would look like if I only got paid while I was working, but still had to sleep in a storage closet at the office. One of the things I learned real quick was would not be acceptable in any other work environment ever. Like, if you had to get up and go to the bathroom as an office employee and not get paid, you wouldn't probably go to the bathroom as much. At the same time, if your computer broke down or you had to restart your computer and you didn't get paid for that, any sort of technical issue that stopped, the internet goes down, things you can't even help, the power goes out, you don't get paid for that. Like, you only get paid while you're specifically doing the specific task that you do. I mean, I did the math and I found out that my actual pay would be a third of what it was. So it's kind of interesting that you have these drivers that are out here that are only getting paid for technically about a third of what they actually do. Because at the same time, you have your off-duty time, like, you don't get paid most of the time for your breaks. Detention, that's a mixed bag. And like I said on an episode a couple weeks ago, like, if a driver, truck parking is already bad enough, sometimes you're going to get stuck with hours of service parking somewhere sketchy, right?
But here's the thing, man. When you break it down, I'm starting to come to terms with both sides of this, because I've watched carriers deploy out driver pay packages, both salary, hourly, pay per day, pay per load. There's all kinds of different ways that this has been attempted to be addressed. There's such a distrust between sides right now that what you're seeing is, when I had, for example, a carrier put out $36 an hour with overtime, the drivers didn't want it. They were asking, well, what about cents per mile? Then you had put out daily pay. All right. And it was a healthy daily pay. Honestly, it was healthy. And it was based off what their average was and an anticipated raise to make it appealing. Drivers didn't want that. So this is one of those things where I think we have to tackle the communication of it. We can't just put the pay package out. We actually have to tackle, this is what you were making cents per mile. This is what you're going to be making on this new package, and be prepared to discuss it, because there is such a level of distrust that even the people trying to do it right are actually falling short. And it's not because of a lack of attempt. It's a lack of trust as an industry.
So here's the thing is, you said $36 an hour.
Yeah. But overtime.
Right. Okay. That's fine. Like, but my thing is, like, with, whether you pay per hour or whether you pay per mile, ultimately, I think the biggest problem is it's not enough. And sure, I understand that's going to raise the cost of goods, because it's going to raise the cost of shipping. that's fine. But if you don't have any truck drivers willing to pull your trucks, it doesn't matter. The problem is overall driver pay has increased. Sure, we had an 11% increase this year, but it still hasn't increased with the level of office jobs, with the level of remote work. You now have remote work, so those drivers who live out in the middle of nowhere can get a job on the internet. Like, the pay is not high enough.
But you have to look at the whole thing. So I was actually instrumental in the design of that package. And what we looked at is what the drivers currently made and then putting a built-in raise above that. So when we actually did the math, the $36 with overtime after 40, that was the first stage of this. And when it got deployed out, what you saw was we were actually showing, like, based on your current hours, this is what you would make in the new structure, which was substantial. It came out to about 15.5% raise, which is more than what most people in the office are going to get. And it was more than what the drivers were currently getting. What was also unique is they even added on, you're going to get paid, basically look at it as like a stipend for every night you're in the truck, even on your 34s if you were on the road. But it wasn't received. I mean, we deployed it out, we marketed it, we put it out. This carrier shifted their entire operations to this new model, and the drivers were asking for cents per mile. So it's an easy conversation to have, and as clickbaity as it might be, but if we honestly want to move the needle, we have to be prepared for those hard discussions coming from the drivers, because there's such a level of distrust that unless you can address that, this is never going to move past go. And you have to be able to connect those dots. I personally witnessed it myself on several attempts already.
Well, but how much do you think that just seemed too good to be true, and drivers are beat down to hell, and that's terrifying? Right. So that's what I'm saying.
That's exactly what it was. The distrust. They're like, this is too good to be true. Just like the salary requirement. Someone tried to deploy out, and it was a healthy salary. It wasn't as aggressive as that one. It was about if I remember correctly, almost like a 5.1, 5.2% raise over their current average. And here's what the drivers came back on this one and said. It was, well, you're going off an average. I'm above that average, so therefore I'm taking a pay cut. I'm not going to get paid for doing more, so why would I do more for you? And so they deployed it out anyway, and productivity went down. The most successful model I've seen deployed is the hourly model with the pay per night, and that way the drivers are getting automatically paid for it. It addresses so many different issues by going to pay per hour. It's just the communication. At the other side, we have to agree as an industry that they deserve to get paid for all their time. Whether it's detention, whether it's driving. I would hope people would take in consideration when they're taking a 34 on the road away from their house. Otherwise, you start to lose these people to other industries that are being more competitive, and they can be home more often.
Well, but you can also make the argument that, like, the average driver pay is between like 55 to 60,000. Yeah, the average recruiter pay is above that. The average broker pay is above that. We wonder why we can't get Gen Z and millennials into trucks. It's because they're all in the office, because they realize they can go home every day, still work in trucking, and come out on top. Anyway, I'm starting to get mad. Okay, who's in the passenger seat today?
So in the passenger seat, we have our return friend, Justin Martin from FreightWaves. How we doing, Justin?
Hey guys, deja vu.
You know, we're in the new year. We're talking about driver pay, and Paul and I are getting back and forth here with some hot takes, and would love to hear your take on driver pay.
So while you guys were going back and forth on that driver that rejected the $36 an hour plus overtime, I'm like doing some quick back of the napkin math. Let's say you get hired somewhere that's paying 50 cents a mile, and you do 3,000 miles that week, so 500 miles a day for 6 days. That's $1,500 gross right there. Just doing back of the napkin math, if you break that down, say you did 70 hours, you burned up your whole clock for that week, that's $21 an hour. If you do $36 an hour, you're getting paid $1,440 for your first 40 hours, and then $1,620 on the 30 hours of overtime. So take $1,440 and so $30.60 right there for your week. You get paid a lot. If you're doing the same amount of hours, if you're getting paid by the hour and you're doing the same amount of work as you are being paid by the mile, you're making a lot more on that overtime. And that's why that's why I think a lot of companies are kind of hesitant on the overtime pay. But that's also why they need to be going after customers for delaying their drivers.
Well, exactly. I'm glad you tackled that, because there's so much that we can carve out on this one. And that's often the part that's left out is, hey, we have real men and women working these jobs. You need these goods moved. If we as an industry made a collective decision that this is the direction we're going, then all the other people would have to pay that because it became the standard.
Yeah, and we're seeing that. So there's this thing called externalities. You as the driver, you have so much stuff that's impacting your pay. Hours of service regulations, speed limiting, that kind of stuff. All that impacts your pay if you're being paid by the mile. If you're being paid percentage, that's usually not including detention pay, or if it is, it's the first 2 hours you basically have to eat that. But yeah, I've been paid by the mile, percentage, per hour, plus overtime, plus double time after 10 hours. I don't think most companies could afford that, but as a government employee at the Postal Service, they can spend indefinitely. But that to me was well, okay, it's complicated. Lots of postal stamps, I'll say that. But no, as a driver, to me that was the best way of getting paid. It's a total mental shift, because you're so used to just running as hard and fast as you can because you're trying to beat the clock. But it's the opposite when you're paid by the hour. You have to slow down. You have to go the speed limit. You're not so much in a rush.
So you mean it would be safer than maybe the current hours of service we have in place?
Absolutely. Now, to give the devil his due, I'll play devil's advocate here. You're going to have guys that are burning the clock too. If say you're a company that's going to be switching over to hourly pay, you really have to watch your guys' time like a hawk.
Well, hold on. You're telling me that people are going to have to manage their people?
And there's the devils are in the detail.
So I got paid hourly when I made the shift into local driving, and I'll tell you, that conversation takes place at an early stage. When I was going through training, someone told me, hey, Charles, slow down. You no longer have to beat the clock. You just need to do it safe. You need to get home. And it resonated with me that I was no longer trying to cram in as many miles in the day. I was trying to do the job as safely and proficiently as possible.
How long did that take you?
Honestly, it took a little bit to resonate within me, but what happened is I kept getting back to the yard earlier than the other guys, and then getting more loads put on me. And they're like, did you ever notice you're working the same amount of hours and you're doing more work than us? And I'm like, and then it sank in. It was probably like about 30, 45 days before someone just looked at me like, hey, Charles, slow down.
Yeah, any place that has like a seniority hierarchy, a lot of the senior guys, they'll pull the new guys aside and they'll say, hey, slow your roll. We don't need to be running as hard as you need to.
Yeah, and it's not as much as to the productivity argument that a lot of carriers are going to make. It's you're going to have a better experience, safety-wise, pay-wise, retention-wise. I mean, we can go down this alley all day long, and I will challenge anybody to sit there and try to argue this one out, because devil's in the details, as you have said before, and the results have been released by the carriers that have done this. There's programs in place that are very successful models, can attract drivers with no problem and retain them because they're paying them an honest wage in a fair way, and it's still profitable. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here to tell the tale.
Absolutely. I would love to see produce, most of all, their reefer switch to hourly, because there are so many places you go to, especially during produce season, where they'll make you sit on the door for 6 to 8 hours because they're using your trailer as free storage, basically, to shuffle stuff around in their warehouse. Okay, fine. Let me get paid for that.
And I would say that's the hurry up and wait, but it's not even hurry up and wait. It's just wait.
No, things need to change, and whether companies need to do that themselves or wait for the government to do them for them, time will tell.
Well, hey, Justin, that's great takes, and appreciate you for starting off the year with us on cents per mile. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
All right, Brian, you're good to go. I'll see you next week. Okay, bye. And that's another one on the schedule.
CDLLife can make any recruiter a rock star. Get started today.
All right, cool. So it's time to go on location with somebody out there actually doing the job. And today we have Chris Thomas, aka Indie Trucker, if you're looking for him on X or just about anywhere else. How's it going today, man?
Man, it's going great.
just out here, getting out of the holidays, had a great time at home, and, just looking forward to the new year, just getting out here and getting in the truck.
Yeah, man. I love to have you on the show. Love the swag that you're wearing over there too. It looks like someone's got you rolling around in some style.
Pretty awesome stuff. I got some good friends.
All right. So Chris, we're talking about driver pay. And it's a hot button issue. There's many different takes on it, but in your opinion, off the cuff, tell me about what your thoughts are on driver pay.
Well, obviously driver pay has been a problem in the industry since I got in here. And, good drivers are going to chase after that pay. If you want to keep a good driver around who's got a safe driving record, who's pleasant to work with, who does his job and doesn't complain, you're going to have to pay them. And you're going to have to pay them for all of the bad days and the good days, like if your truck breaks down, or, hey, what about if you're laid over? There's a lot of things that a lot of companies get by without having to pay for. And, until somebody steps in and says, hey, you're going to pay these guys for their time, they're not going to pay. They're going to get all the free labor they want, right?
We've said it time and time again. Paul and I, it's one of the few points we agree on everything you need to be paid for. If you're in that truck doing the job away from your family, there should be a cost to the employer, to you for that time. That's how we make trucking sexy again. Outside of that, it's how you break down that pay. So when you envision this, not as an owner operator, as a company driver, how do you envision that being broken down? Is it hourly? Is it percentage? Is it by the load, by the day? But what's that look like to you?
To me, I honestly think that it needs to be like a divided structure. Like you need to have some mileage pay in there. So that's going to, kind of push the performance of the drivers so that they will move. But then when they get off the road and they're not moving that truck down, and maybe in conjunction with moving that truck, there needs to be a base pay, something hourly for the work that you're doing, breakdown pay, layover pay, detention pay. All this stuff needs to be put up front to the driver, not as a,
after 2 hours, after 24 hours.
Right. Yeah. No, they need to be immediately, because what you're doing there is you're giving that driver time to think. And he's thinking, he's like, hey, I'm going to pop on here and see what else is out there. If you want good quality drivers, and everybody does today with the market and the lawyers out here and the nuclear verdicts floating around, you need good drivers. So, you need to pay them what they're worth.
So that's interesting that, you sit slightly on the other side of this than Justin, who was on before you. You sit on there where you still think that cents per mile needs to be incorporated somewhere. And I may be inclined to agree with you slightly on this, but then I also think back to hours of service are regulated. You don't have control. How you're unloaded or loaded is taken in someone else's hands, not yours. There's a lot of contributing factors that determine how many miles you're going to get. So I think maybe to consider the solution is maybe a hybrid where there is hourly pay with a very small cents per mile component to it to help keep that performance contingent on what you're doing. But I'm not completely sold on the idea that it should be predominantly based off cents per mile, because you don't have control over that in today's world.
No, that's absolutely right. And it's, it also depends on your market. You should probably be paid a little bit more if you're dealing with, let's say city traffic every day, because you're not going to be moving as fast. You're going to be dealing with traffic, which is a higher risk environment where your chance of collision is even higher. So you're really going to be on your game every day versus, going down, anytime you're behind the wheel is important, but there's often circumstances that, companies need to look at and realize that the hazard pay, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe looking at the hazard involved in that day for that route.
Yeah. So Chris, you're out there on the road, you've been doing the job. If someone wanted to say someone came at you with an hourly pay structure, say I'm your recruiter, I came at you with an hourly pay structure, how would you perceive that?
Well, obviously for me, it's going to be a pretty high hourly pay structure at my level and stature or my status in the tenure in the industry. But, I'd look at it. I'd have to consider it and see, know what your value is to that. If you think that, from a perspective, a driver's definitely worth more than $21 an hour. Most local gigs right now are paying somewhere between $25 and $29 an hour plus benefits. So,
Not even. I see 18. I see 16, which is absurd. I've seen 20 in downtown Chicago.
Yeah, there's definitely a wide spectrum out there for the skill level and for what the freight that you're hauling. But when I see those low wages, I walk into the truck stop and hey, they're looking for a third shift employee to come there and run a cash register for $16.50 an hour. And when you get into that kind of, you have to lift that pay up to get a highly qualified driver who's going to drive down the road and not kill your family or kill your friends. There's a lot to it every day. So, we're not just some person you can pick up off the street. We're professionals and we have to be paid as such.
Yeah, and I think if you look at this, like there might be an upfront cost by raising pay across the board as far as the total amount, but also changing the pay structure. But think about the safety cost that'll be dropped down because people are operating more safely. Think about the maintenance cost because people are taking the time to address your equipment with the respect it deserves to make sure that they can keep moving. Think about all these things that are going to play into that and be addressed simultaneously while you're addressing the driver pay. And it might not be that immediate gratification to offset that in that first 30 or 40 or 90 days. But I think long term, we'll see a lot of that other stuff addressed through this. And I encourage people to start evaluating this and taking it more seriously because those of you that make that choice on the front end are going to benefit before everyone's jumping on the bandwagon.
Absolutely. And it's time. It's definitely a time for change in the industry. The whole industry is a buzz bite with the Overtime for Truckers Act. And just, you can see it every day out here. The quality level needs to be stepped up. And the only way to address that issue is through properly paying good professional truck drivers for their time.
Awesome. Well, hey, Chris, thank you for coming on Cents Per Mile. I hope you stay safe out there on the road and have a nice, prosperous 2024.
Thank you all. And you too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
You wouldn't work for free. Don't expect your drivers to. I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson. See you next time.